Hello everyone, I am Mery, 28 years old, living in a small house in the suburbs of Connecticut. This house used to be filled with laughter and warmth when my mother-in-law was alive. She, the soul of the family, always took good care of everyone and brought a warm family atmosphere. But since she passed away from cancer, the house has now become quiet and empty. My father-in-law, David, is very sad. He tries to overcome the pain of losing his wife by burying himself in his carpentry work. Every day he leaves home early in the morning and only returns late at night, his face always looking tired. My husband, James, does not want to go to work all day, walks alone for hours in the park near our house, avoiding contact with the family. I feel guilty in this family. Meals become silent. Conversations become rare. I try to take care of Dad and James, but it seems that the distance between us further and further away. No one in the family really shared their feelings, and that made me feel very lonely. One evening, as I was cleaning the kitchen, my eyes fell on a family photo hanging on the wall. In the photo, my mother-in-law was smiling, her hand resting on James's and my father-in-law's shoulders. The photo was a painful reminder of the happy days gone by. I wondered if this family would ever find the same joy again. 3 years later, when I was 28, my father-in-law, David, decided to remarry. The woman he married was Luky, a gentle nurse who worked at a nearby hospital. She brought her son, Luky, a graphic design student who had just moved from California to live with us. At first, I had mixed feelings about this change. Luky was very kind and considerate, but the presence of her and Luky made me feel like I was losing my familiar space in the house. James didn't say anything about this. He kept his distance and spent most of his time outside. Luky was an easygoing, intelligent but rather reserved guy. He often spent time in his room, working on his computer and designing. When we met in the kitchen or living room, the atmosphere between us was always tense. Once I tried to strike up a conversation, but Luky only answered with short sentences. However, family life was not completely peaceful. Once, the roof leaked after a heavy rain, and Luky and I fixed it together. He was quite tactful, and we had a few minutes of comfortable conversation at first. From then on, I realized that he wasn't really unapproachable, he was just unfamiliar with the new environment. Such small feelings gradually helped us build a strange relationship, both close and face-to-face. During family meals, Luky often tried to create a warm atmosphere by telling funny stories or asking about everyone. Thanks to Luky's presence, the house began to have a little life again. However, deep inside, I still felt a vague complexity when looking at Luky. The new family life seemed stable, but I knew that this stability was only superficial. My husband, James, continued to live freely in his own world, often going for walks or staying late at the office. Meanwhile, Luky and I began to talk and interact more, but the feelings we created formed a more complicated story. Luky helped me. Under his gentle gaze, he gently placed his hand on my shoulder and asked me how I was. One morning, when I was tending to the small garden behind the house, Luky often walked towards me. It seemed like a normal action, but I felt something strange from his eyes. After that, we started to have closer moments. From fixing the coffee machine in the kitchen together, to long conversations about hobbies and life, I realized that there was a special relationship between us. Luky was sensitive and delicate, things that James had never shown. These feelings confused me. I couldn't deny that I was starting to be attracted to Luky in a way that I had never thought of. One night, when everyone had gone to bed, I sat in the living room reading a book. Luky appeared, holding a cup of hot tea, and sat down next to me. We talked under the soft light of the table lamp, and I felt a strange warmth in my heart. But that warmth made me feel guilty. I am James's wife, and Luky's sister-in-law, just half-siblings in the family. These feelings I feel are wrong, but I can't control myself. A certain place on my body feels very hot, and it seems like I want to express something sensitive. It was a rainy evening. The house was quiet. My father-in-law and Ruhis had gone to bed early, and James had not come home from work yet. I went down to the bathroom, only to see Luky standing quietly by the window, watching the raindrops on the glass. And I asked softly, "Can't you sleep?" The words broke the silence. Luky turned to look at me, his eyes reflecting a strong light. He replied, his voice low and gentle to me. We sat down to talk, then started an unplanned conversation, but then the conversation gradually deepened. I talked about feeling lonely in the family, about no longer feeling connected to James. Luky listened, his face thoughtful. Me too, he admitted after a moment of silence. I don't know where I really belong in this house. The feeling of empathy between Luky and me was like an invisible string drawing us closer together. When our eyes met, I felt something beyond the boundaries of reason. Luky gently reached out to touch my hand, and I couldn't pull away. "Luky," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "We can't do it here, but I can't pretend I don't feel anything." An hour passed, and before I could think, Luky touched those two places of mine, but I was nervous, but also wanted something sensitive. An hour later, we crossed the boundary of a sisterly relationship. In the small kitchen, amidst the sound of falling rain, we let our emotions overwhelm our reason. Luky made me Luky's person. After that moment, an eerie silence fell. Neither of us dared to look each other in the eye. I stood up, grabbed my pants, underwear, and hurriedly left the kitchen, filled with guilt and regret. The days after that rainy evening, the atmosphere in the house became heavier than ever. James took a long-term job in Boston and was often away from home, only returning on weekends. His absence created a huge void in our lives. My life. But Luky's presence made me feel more suffocated than ever. Luky and I tried to keep our distance, avoiding unnecessary conversations. When we accidentally met in the house, his eyes always avoided me, and I didn't dare to look straight at him. The words that were never said were like rocks weighing down on my heart. One morning, when the whole family was having dinner, Ruhis accidentally noticed the difference in the relationship between Luky and I. She asked, "Are you two okay? I see you two talk less to each other lately." I tried to smile and answer, superficially, but Ruhis's prying eyes made me feel uncomfortable. Another evening, Luky took the initiative to meet me in the living room when everyone had gone to bed. "Mery," he called softly, his voice full of shame, "we need to end these feelings, before things go too far." I nodded, my heart filled with pain. "I know. But Luky, do you think I can forget everything so easily? Every time I see you, I just feel more confused." Luky didn't answer, just silently looked at me. After a while, he stood up and left, leaving me sitting alone in the cold room. In the following days, Luky started to avoid me. He spent most of his time at school or the library, only coming home when necessary. I realized that, although painful, this was the best way for both of us to gradually forget everything. As time passed, my life began to stabilize, although not completely free from the hauntings of the past. Luky still lived in the house, but the distance between us was clear. He no longer tried to get close to me, and I also tried to focus on mending my relationship with James. Although, in my mind, I knew that this relationship was nothing more than an obligation. One winter evening, as I was sitting in the living room folding clothes, Luky appeared with a cup of hot tea. "Consider it a thank you for what you have done for the family," he said with a slight smile. For the first time in months, I felt a little warmer when I was with him. Our conversations became less heavy, and although we were no longer intimate, we still maintained a certain concern for each other. Luky was no longer just a half-brother, but a part of the family that I could count on, especially since James was often away on business trips. One day, James returned home, carrying a bouquet of roses and an apology. "I know I haven't spent much time with you, but I want us to start over," he said, his eyes full of hope. I smiled as I accepted the flowers, but my heart was still filled with doubt. However, I decided to give this marriage another chance. I began to learn to look at James with different eyes, trying to remember why I fell in love with him. Meanwhile, Luky also changed. He helped me more with the housework, took care of Ruhis when she had a cold. One evening, Luky quietly helped me set the table, and although no one said anything, the atmosphere between us still carried an underlying tension. I wondered if I should confess everything to James. This thought kept repeating in my head, keeping me awake all night. Part of me wanted to speak out to free myself from the guilt, but the other part was afraid that the truth would destroy the family I had tried so hard to mend. One day, Ruhis suddenly asked me, "Is there anything you want to share with me? I feel like you're not well lately." That question was like a knife stabbing into my mind. I could only reply with a forced smile, but inside, the internal struggle was even more intense. One autumn afternoon, the pale yellow sunlight spread across the fallen leaves in front of the porch. I held his hand, intending to speak. "James, I have something to tell you." But just as I was about to continue, his gentle gaze made me choke up. I realized that the truth could destroy everything we had tried to rebuild. Luky entered the room, holding a bottle of wine for the whole family to enjoy. He glanced at me, as if he knew what I was thinking. The atmosphere suddenly became stifling, but no one said anything more. That night I sat in front of the mirror in the bedroom, looking at myself. I asked myself, will the truth bring freedom? Or will it only leave wounds that will never heal? I took a deep breath, and I thought that I would definitely bring Jane's happiness, but I didn't have the courage to tell him. I put the words into my mind, knowing that maybe one day, I would be strong enough to face the truth. Congratulations on hearing our true story. Please don't miss the next part.